Welcome back everyone to the Audacious Money Witch channel where we talk about investing and trading stocks, bonds, and crypto assets around the world. Last quarter, Intel lost 16.6 billion in a single quarter. This was by far the biggest loss in the company's history. For context, it's about 9 times as big of a loss as AMD's in profits in the same year. Did you know there was a time when Intel was an extremely profitable monopoly? X86 CPU was a monopoly, and now people can't wait to run away and run into ARM. In this video, I will talk about why Intel is my next long-term turnaround stock to accumulate. And even Jeremy is joining in the X86 excitement in Lisa Su's AMD.
I love this stock. This is AMD. This is a stock I just started buying really in the past few days. And this is a position I would love to build out quite substantially over this next, I would say, this next few months. Regardless of however the stock's performed in the past, it really means nothing to me. All that matters for me is the future.
Intel Corporation is an American semiconductor giant that was just recently removed from the Dow Jones 30, a prestigious best of the best list, where they were dethroned by NVIDIA Corp. Based on how these two have performed over the last 5 years, you can see why Intel lost their crown. It got so bad that Qualcomm asked if Intel would consider a buyout. Zoom in on just Intel, now down 57% from 5 years ago, and we see a roller coaster for investors. Compare it to other large semiconductor businesses besides NVIDIA, and it doesn't get any better. This stock has been an absolute dog.
So what happened? Intel's story is long, going back to when they were very dominant in the chip making field a decade ago. TSMC, the world's largest chip manufacturer, has about 76,000 employees. NVIDIA, the world's largest chip designer, has a bit less than 30,000 employees. Meanwhile, ARM, the maker of the world's most successful CPU architecture nowadays, has about 6,000 employees. Each of these firms are individually worth significantly more than Intel, and yet Intel has more employees than all three of these combined. That might seem surprising until you realize that Intel has historically been a whole different class of animal. Compare, for example, NVIDIA's Grace chips with Intel's competing Xeon 6. Grace chips are designed by NVIDIA. They're manufactured by TSMC, and they use ARM's instruction set architecture. Meanwhile, Xeon 6 chips are pretty much all made in-house by Intel, while TSMC, NVIDIA, and ARM, and most other modern chips companies focus primarily on segment of the chip making process. Intel had the complete chain in-house, so it was a bit like having 3 of these companies roll into one. This vertical integration is one of the many things that led the company's downfall, but for many decades, it was one of the biggest strengths because if all these parts work really well together, then they create incredible synergy. The X86 instruction set architecture was a bit like a shield for the rest of the business. See, ISAs are basically standards that they describe how a chip execute code or instructions on its most basic level. Once adopted, pretty much every X86 chips can technically run on every operating system like Windows or Mac OS, and millions of apps on top of this almost automatically.
This is extremely convenient, but it also often makes switching away tremendously expensive because it would often require having to rewrite tons and tons of software for a new standard. X86 was the dominant ISA for decades, and it was to a large part owned by Intel, who only had to share it with AMD.
She's like one of the goats. When she got at AMD, you gotta understand, I gotta take you back there. This was like a $2 or $3 billion market cap company versus a $200 billion plus market cap company now. AMD was a joke. No one respected AMD when Lisa Su got there and after she was there for just her first year or two. No one respected this company. The stock price was under $2 shortly after she took over as the CEO of this company. Like, no one believed in it. And she made this into one of the most incredible big tech companies that I wouldn't be surprised if in the future AMD is eventually a $1 trillion plus company. And to think that this company was, a lot of people thought this company was going to go bankrupt. I'm going to be honest with you guys. Back in those early days of her being CEO, it was in a bad spot, and she completely turned this show around. Insane.
Which overall created an incredible comfort situation for them. Their competition in CPUs was more or less reduced to a single company for many, many years.
Right now, they have about 1% PC market share, and Intel has closer to 80%.
I mean, talk about a crazy defensive moat. Second, until about 2015, Intel had what were clearly the world's best chip foundries, which were consistently a generation or two ahead of other manufacturers like TSMC and Samsung, which meant Intel chips easily had 20 to 30% better power efficiency and performance just from manufacturing, which gave them a huge leg up versus AMD. Today, it's GPU hardware that is the big moneymaker for chips, and Intel hasn't been producing the right hardware. AI hardware is almost entirely reliant on GPUs, with 3 or 4 GPUs per CPU in newer AI data centers. It's fallen behind in a space that has become increasingly more and more relevant since 2018. It became obvious to everyone in the room that the AI boom and complex computing tasks going forward will require heavier and heavier GPU power, as well as thinner and thinner CPUs. Without high NA EUV lithography, a tech that Intel recently bought into, Intel hasn't been able to keep up in the CPU space much either. That will change when their Ohio facility, funded in part by the CHIPS Act, spins up in the next few years. But that's still years out. What's going on right now?
Losses, that's what's going on. On October 31st, the last earnings call, Intel posted the largest losses ever as they have begun the switch to produce GPUs, the next-gen CPUs. They also announced mass layoffs, which may actually be justified. It turns out that Intel is one of the largest employer of all these competing firms, even if they aren't performing well. The changes will right the ship. I really do believe that Intel is changing for the better in ways that it hasn't done before. It's catching up to a landscape that is already changed. But the fixes they have introduced have me interested and listening. The largest change comes on December 2nd when the CEO, Pat Gelsinger, announced his departure. Other changes that I'm going to get into, this is the cherry on top because it means that Intel's board sees the need of fresh eyes and new leadership. Pat has been in charge since 2021, and Intel has completely failed to position itself for anything AI related. If you follow me long enough, you will know that Gelsinger is one of the most overpaid CEO ever. His salary was $178 million a year. That is excessive pay for a CEO. Talk about audacity. Intel has started evaluating a handful of outsiders, including former board member, lip role of chief executive officer, after the struggling American chip icon ousted company vet Pat Gelsinger.
And a well-respected semiconductor industry veteran who has long been seen as a contender for CEO at Intel, has been approached by Intel's board in recent days to gauge his interest in taking up the job. Intel's board is mostly evaluating outsider candidates for the role and has also approached Marvell Technology CEO Matt Murphy, The board has formed a search committee for the Gelsinger's successor and is expected to make a final decision on his replacement in the coming months. The company on Monday named Chief Financial Officer David Zinsner and Senior Executive Michelle Johnston Holthus as interim co-CEOs. The move to replace Gelsinger, who took charge of Intel less than 4 years ago, came after the board decided that the pace of his costly plan to turn around Intel's fortunes was not quick enough. The board can't wait, and Wall Street investors can't wait. But as you and I, we have all the time in the world. We don't have a boss to answer to as we manage our own money. So I will take advantage of the cheap shares Wall Street is selling right now. The hunt for Intel's next leader is one of the most closely watched CEO successions in corporate America and comes at a pivotal time for the ailing chipmaker, which is enduring one of the bleakest periods in its 5-decade history.
Peter used to say that every successful company could look back at a defining moment early on where they would have died had it not been for the courage and the tenacity and maybe the insanity of one visionary person who put it all on the line, even though it seemed like a huge mistake at the time. A moment where all the metrics and the numbers didn't mean anything. It was all about the emotion. It was about belief, rational or irrational.
ASML machine will create an opportunity in AI chips. One of the curious moments to me when I was researching my ASML stock was that a week ago, while Intel was buying their newest generation of fabricators, high NA EUV lithography machines, TSMC wasn't. Intel received their instruments in March and has been building the fabs in Ohio and Arizona to house and operate them. It took till November this year to receive their first shipment. This kind of getting ahead is important for Intel, as every month in their R&D process matters now, that they have left the TikTok cycle so far behind.
These machines will be capable of taking logic nodes all the way to the 2 nanometer level, which is very, very small, and currently beyond what both TSMC and Intel produce. This is a massive in chips in general and continues to push forward Moore's Law. Gelsinger promises that his tenure would bring change, and it has, but mostly in showing off how badly behind Intel had become. It was a giant from years past, not a giant today. We will change as Intel produces these new products and the newer line of chips possible thanks to ASML's machines. The obvious risk is continued losses, which could further harm Intel's ability to spin up these 2 new American fabs or build a new GPU architecture for the next generation after this current launch.
When you think about what's going on the chip side and setting aside Intel's product decisions that they've made, they have a great infrastructure that ultimately can be redirected to help build what will be ultimately something that is bigger than the internet over the next decade. But I think it underscores that there is value at Intel, and the reason, of course, is this bigger AI infrastructure.
Ultimately, I am highly considering Intel as a 2% place in my equities portfolio. My other semiconductor holdings are ASML and AMD. Depending on where the direction of the business is going, I still believe there is a strong brand inside Intel.